Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain prophets Isaiah chapter 4 in a clear and simple way, step by step. Now this remarkable chapter presents what is honestly one of the most dramatic shifts you'll find anywhere in the prophetic texts. It's a very short chapter, right? Just 6 verses. But in those 6 short verses, we are taken on this incredibly profound journey. We go from the absolute rock-bottom devastation of complete societal collapse straight into the heart of miraculous divine protection and renewal. It's an amazing transition, and we're going to break it all down together.
So, here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with a quick introduction to get our context right. Then we'll look at the Holy Remnant in verse 3, the purging of the filth in verse 4, and the creation of a divine canopy in verses 5 and 6. After that, we'll pull out some practical everyday lessons and finally wrap it all up with a quick recap.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Introduction and Chapter Context. To really grasp what's happening in this chapter, we absolutely have to know where we are in the story. In the previous chapters, the prophet described a time of immense arrogance, severe moral decay, and ultimately the complete devastation of Jerusalem. So as we hit the very first verse of chapter 4, we are literally standing in the wreckage. This is phase 1, the judgment of the city. Verse 1 actually paints this terrifying picture of demographic collapse after a brutal war. It describes 7 women taking hold of one man, offering to eat their own food and buy their own clothes, just begging to be called by his name so they don't have to face society's reproach alone. Because the men have fallen in battle, the surviving women are totally desperate for any sort of family or protection. It is a moment of total, heartbreaking vulnerability. But then, right in the middle of this desolate scene, verse 2 pivots. It moves us into phase 2. The prophet suddenly brings a message of incredible hope, talking about a beautiful and glorious growth for the survivors. So keep this 4-phase timeline in your head as we go through the verses. We move from harsh judgment to a painful washing away of filth, to a holy designation for the survivors, and it all finishes with a magnificent canopy of divine protection. Understanding this sequence makes the whole chapter crystal clear.
Moving on to Section 2, the Holy Remnant, focusing on verse 3.
Let's look closely at verse 3 to see exactly who makes it through this terrible hardship. Who is actually left standing when the dust finally settles? The text says, "That is left in Zion, and he that remaineth in Jerusalem shall be called holy, even every one that is written unto life in Jerusalem." Notice the heavy focus on a very specific group of people. The Hebrew implies these are the ones who endured that great, terrible upheaval we just talked about. And look at that phrase, written unto life. In the ancient world, cities actually kept physical ledgers of their living citizens. Here, the prophet is using that concept to describe a purposeful divine accounting. A lot of people didn't make it. They were swept away by the consequences of their actions. But the survivors? They are given a completely new status. They aren't just lucky stragglers. They shall be called holy.
Now, if we just look at the plain meaning here, the Peshat, we see something really fascinating. Simply surviving this intense crucible of judgment results in a transformed status. This specific group is called the remnant. And in biblical Hebrew, the word used for holy is kadosh. But being kadosh doesn't mean you're suddenly some flawless angel. In a very practical sense, it means being set apart. It means you are separated and dedicated for a special divine purpose. These people survived the collapse of their society and the destruction of their homes. Because they are written unto life, their survival is absolutely not an accident. God has designated them for a renewed future, where they will rebuild their world on a solid foundation of truth, leaving the arrogance of the past behind.
Which brings us to Section 3, Purging the Filth, unpacking verse 4.
So you might be wondering, how exactly does this remnant get to be so holy? It definitely doesn't happen by magic overnight. The text makes it clear that a really profound, deep cleansing has to happen first. Verse 4 says, "When the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and shall have purged the blood of Jerusalem from the midst thereof, by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of destruction." Okay, that is some incredibly dense, intense language, right? Let's break it down. The prophet is using super vivid imagery here, washing away filth and purging blood. This is talking about the total removal of the deep moral and physical corruption that destroyed the city to begin with. And how does it happen? By the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of destruction. The Hebrew words here are ruach mishpat, meaning a spirit of justice or judgment, and ruach be'er, a spirit of burning or purging. This tells us that the terrible things they suffered weren't just random violence. It was a strict, necessary mechanism for their purification.
Let's unpack these 3 specific steps, because this is a very direct sequential process of cleansing. First, we have washing away the filth of the daughters of Zion. In the plainest sense, this filth is the moral corruption, the extreme vanity, and that haughty arrogance the prophet condemns so heavily back in chapter 3. It's a total spiritual and moral reset of the people's character. Second, purging the blood. This is a bit different. The blood refers to deep-seated guilt, literal violence, and the systemic oppression of the vulnerable that had poisoned Jerusalem. It has to be completely extracted. And third, applying that spirit of judgment and destruction. It's so important to realize that this is like painful but life-saving surgery. You simply cannot have a holy remnant, and you cannot rebuild a healthy society without aggressively burning out that deep-rooted corruption first. It's the fire of judgment that actually purifies the gold.
And that leads us perfectly into section 4, a divine canopy, looking at verses 5 and 6.
So once the filth is finally purged and the remnant is declared holy, what happens next? How does God respond to them now? Well, the text reveals this absolutely spectacular divine solution. It reads, "And the Lord will create over the whole habitation of Mount Zion and over her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night." Listen to those specific environmental shifts. If that sensory imagery sounds familiar to you, it absolutely should. This is a massive, undeniable callback to the Exodus from Egypt. Remember how God guided and protected the Israelites in that harsh wilderness with a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire? The prophet is explicitly telling us that this ancient, intimate, incredibly powerful divine presence is coming right back to rest directly over Mount Zion. And this brilliantly illustrates that this isn't a part-time thing. It's a continuous 24/7 divine presence. Just imagine the psychological comfort this gives to a traumatized group of survivors. During the scorching, oppressive heat of the Middle Eastern day, they get a thick cloud and smoke offering vital shade and physical relief. Then, as the cold, dark, and scary night sets in, they have the shining of a flaming fire giving them light, warmth, and complete visibility. Think about what it means for people who just survived utter societal collapse to suddenly have a visible, tangible guarantee of safety. It means they can finally breathe. They can finally rest. The survivors are never going to be left exposed to the terrors of the world again.
To clarify a couple of the older English terms that finish out the chapter, words like pavilion and covert simply mean a protective, impenetrable shelter against the worst elements. The original Hebrew uses words like sukkah, which means a protective booth, and chuppah, which means a canopy of glory. The promise here is that this divine glory will literally act as a physical and spiritual roof over the people. Whether they face the blistering heat of the sun or a sudden, violent rainstorm, this holy remnant is guaranteed absolute refuge. And think about how perfectly this brings the whole prophecy full circle. We started in verse 1 with absolute vulnerability, desperate people totally exposed to the ruins of their society. And now we end with an overarching divine canopy for total protection. The harsh judgment is officially over. The era of sustained, ultimate safety has arrived.
Let's move to section 5, practical lessons and ideas. So, taking a step back from the literal text for a moment, we have to ask ourselves, what are the simple, everyday takeaways for us? How does Jerusalem's journey apply to our own lives? First off, we learn that enduring really difficult, sometimes even destructive seasons is often the exact path we have to take for personal renewal. It's a lot like pruning a tree, right? Sometimes making those drastic, painful cuts is the only way to save the plant and encourage fresh growth. Second, spiritual cleansing is totally necessary. We just can't hold on to our filth, our bad habits, our arrogance, the way we might mistreat others if we genuinely want to move forward. That purging process is uncomfortable for sure, but it refines who we are. And finally, this chapter is a beautiful reminder that true refuge is ultimately found in the divine presence. Real safety doesn't come from the physical walls we build, or our bank accounts, or our social status. All those things were destroyed in the earlier verses. True safety comes from seeking out and resting under that spiritual canopy.
Finally, section 6, quick recap and conclusion. Let's just take a quick moment to summarize this incredible transformation we've mapped out today. We have covered a lot of ground, step by step, going from total devastation to perfect peace. It really is a complete narrative arc in just 6 short verses. We started in a broken city, marked by demographic collapse and the desperate grief of verse 1. Then, we watched that promise of the Lord's beautiful growth emerge in verse 2. We saw the surviving remnant go through a deep cleansing, where the strict spirit of judgment burned away their moral filth and violence.
And we concluded with these newly holy people standing safely under a miraculous day and night canopy of God's presence on Mount Zion, perfectly sheltered from the elements forever. And that leaves us with a really powerful question to carry forward. How can we allow the spirit of judgment to wash away our own filth so we can find true refuge today? It's absolutely a profound thought worth reflecting on as we navigate our own daily challenges and seek out our own personal renewal. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.